Today the pipe and tabor are generally thought of as the iconic instruments of Morris dancing, going back centuries. But were this simple wooden whistle and its paired drum the original instruments of this dance form? If we explore the first records of Morris dancing on the streets of London in the 16th century, the connection is tenuous at best. This is interesting because after 1580 the links between Morris dancing and the pipe and tabor become quite prominent. You can see on the image I'm showing on the screen now that by the time of the Shakespearean actor William Kemp's famous Morris dance from London to Norwich just before the year 1600, the pipe and tabor seemed to be a choice instrumental accompaniment. And here is William Kemp depicted on a woodcut with his tabourer Thomas Sly. John Forrest, in his book A History of Morris Dancing 1458 to 1750, notes that the urban Morris came in many forms, but the unifying feature of each type of Morris dancing on the streets was its movement in a procession. This movement, along with its situation outdoors, preferred certain musical instruments. The Morris dance appeared on the streets in the midsummer watch processions as early as 1511, but were joining an existing performance tradition which influenced the early development of its style. A good indication of this is provided in John Stow's late 16th century text, Survey of London, where he describes the musical instruments and other sonorous activities of the procession. The marching watch contained in number about 2,000 men, part of them being old soldiers of skill to be captains, lieutenants, sergeants, corporals, and etc., whistlers, drummers and fifes, standard and ensign bearers, sword players, trumpeters on horseback, demi-lancers on great horses, gunners with handguns or half-harks, archers in coats of white fustian, signed on the breast and back in the arms of the city, their bows bent in their hands, with sheafs of arrows by their sides, pikemen in bright corslets, burgonets and etc., halbarders like the billmen in Almain rivets, and aprons of mail in great number. There were also diverse pageants, Morris dances, constables on one half, which was 120 on St. John's Eve, the other half on St. Peter's Eve in bright harness, some over gilt, and every one adorned of scarlet thereupon, and his henchmen following him, his minstrels before him, and his cresset light passing by him, the waits of the city, the mayor's officers, for his guard before him, in a livery of worsted or say jackets partly coloured, the mayor himself well mounted on horseback, the sword-bearer before him in a fair armour well mounted also, the mayor's footmen, and the like torch-bearers about him, henchmen twain upon great stirring horses following him. The sheriff's watches came one after the other in like order, but not so large in number as the mayor's, for where the mayor had besides his giant 3 pageants, each of the sheriffs had beside their giants but 2 pageants, each their Morris dance, and 1 henchman, their officers in jackets of worsted, or say partly coloured, differing from the mayor and each from other, but having harnessed men and a great many, and etc. This midsummer watch was thus accustomed yearly, time out of mind until the year 1539. We hear in John Stow's description a pretty spectacular array of sound in the processions on the streets of London. Not only were there trumpeters on horseback, but the London city waits and minstrels, all of who played a variety of instruments, as well as the Morris dancers themselves. Then, in addition to these musicians and dancers, the sounds of all of the soldiers riding on their horses or marching on foot would have added to the sound of the procession as they moved along the streets. Note, however, that the tabor, pipe and drum are not mentioned here. In order to determine when these instruments became associated with public Morris dancing, we need to look at the records from trade guilds, including drapers, carpenters, ironmongers, skinners and tallow-chandlers, for example. And I'm going to share some examples from the volume on Civic London through to the year 1558. Now, there are some problems with the terminology when it comes to the pipe and tabor. The first problem is that the word tabor is used interchangeably to mean both the tabor drum and the pipe, which is a small wooden whistle. In It is hard to know when the pair of instruments, like that depicted in the image of Thomas Sly accompanying William Kemp, became the standard sound for Morris dancing. In these earliest records, it's hard to know when they're referring just to the tabor drum or to both instruments together. Records from as early as 1501 list payments in the Carpenter's Warden's accounts to a tabourer for the London Midsummer Watch. The Draper's Warden's accounts list a payment for a tabourer to play on a barge in November of the same year. Then in 1502, the Skinners list a payment to a tabourer for waiting on the watch for both nights. This means that tabourers were employed for processions and performances before any records of Morris dancing in this public setting. In fact, when Morris dances are first listed as being paid in the Draper's Warden's accounts during the year 1511, no tabourers are mentioned. 1520 is the first year that Morris dancers are listed specifically being paid with instrumentalists in the Draper's Warden's accounts, but in this case they are listed as playing with city waits. So what is the relationship between the pipe and tabor and Morris dancing at its arrival on the streets of London? The truth is there isn't any direct link at this time. What seems more likely is that the Morris dancers were performing with the musicians who were already performing in the Midsummer Watch processions for decades before the Morris dancers were ever employed there. These processions, as we heard, did in fact include tabourers, so it could be that over time these musicians began to be more closely associated with Morris dancers. The tabor pipe is an incredibly loud and high-pitched whistle whose sound can carry over long distances, and the tabor drum is a loud and guttural sound, also calling attention to it. When paired together, these instruments are great for drawing a crowd around a performance. It could be that as Morris dancing started to feature in other festivities such as May Games in the late 16th century, this pair of instruments, which already was used in the London processions, was chosen to accompany Morris dancing as a more independent form of performance in these other settings. Then by the time we get to William Kemp's Morris dance from London to Norwich, his tabourer serves this exact purpose, to draw a crowd around the famous actor and generate excitement for his performance. This research was funded by the European Union.